So I understand that they're going to be doing the George Floyd trial, and they're going to be hiring internet social media experts in order to keep the public informed in regards to the facts of the case. So perhaps this would be a good time to also inform the public about the truth regarding George Floyd and his background. Perhaps this would be a good time, now that we're very clear. We've heard all about all the injustices from the protesters. What we haven't heard anything from the victims. We haven't heard from the victim who George Floyd held up, who George Floyd put a gun to her belly and asked if perhaps she wanted her baby killed as well. We haven't heard from the victims who are still suffering on the sidelines in silence, while all you people who have not endured true domestic violence in terms of losing body parts, how it is, how our lives are. Well, let's see. In my case, it's been November 2017 was when this happened. Now I am still struggling every day. This isn't something that I get to have a sentence for and it just goes away. This is a life sentence. Now, George Floyd went to prison for 5 years. From what the records show, he first portrayed himself as some sort of utility person. He went to her door and was in some sort of uniform. The details of George Floyd having his associates ransack this woman's house looking for drugs, he didn't care less when she was screaming or cried out for her life. His buddies ransacked her house. He went to prison for 5 years. Brooks, the guy in Atlanta, he also was a Violence Against Women Act, quote, domestic violence criminal abuser. His criminal charges include children. So while those of you were thinking, oh, it was his daughter's birthday, look up the records. He wasn't too concerned about that when he was abusing his daughter criminally, to the point of being a criminal statute violation. And by the way, for those of you that were giving the opinion that, oh, the policeman should have just let him walk home, he was on probation already. And when you're on probation, the limit for alcohol is 0. And by the way, when you're on probation, they already gave him that second or third chance. When you're on probation, you've already been given that chance. And there's already victims that have lifelong scars. This is just a physical, symbolic indicator of the lifelong scars that are left behind. You people who don't know what you're talking about, it's nice that you have compassion. What seems like misguided passion, though, from my perspective. Because then Mr. Wisconsin, he also was a violence against women violator. These guys are not innocent. They are not angels. In fact, you people who are chiming in from afar, who haven't been victims or have no experience, you have no business telling the police or anyone, because you don't know what you're talking about. And your generous hearts and empathy is misguided, and it is causing great danger to the least among us in our society. By the way, this is still a terrible problem. It is still making it very hard for me to even want to be alive. It's February 20 something. I don't even know the days anymore. But the victims who are being terrorized and traumatized by this continual glorifying of violence. And by the way, those of us who have been victims of domestic violence, whether it's the people's house or my house, let's take this opportunity to research and investigate and inform the public and find out why it is. How is it that 2 counts, aggravated assault 13-1204, turns into a mere 5 months in prison? The victim is still struggling every day in living hell. And now the compounded, complex breadth and depth from all of this I'm sure it's not just me that is. We are the new, apparently, least among you. I know that because we're already circling back to the immigrants. We're already circling back. There's a whole rainbow of colored people, other colors, not just the black and the brown, who have been suffering in silence all this time. We don't have marching bands. It's Black women, too, who have suffered at the hands of these violence against women violators. It's not just white, yellow, beige, whatever other colored people there are out here. So why don't we take this opportunity? Why don't we do an investigation? Why don't we tell the stories of the women and the children that all of these Black Lives Matter highlighted, quote, heroes? Why don't we hear from their victims? Why don't we investigate what happened? Allow me to be the token white woman who has been desperate for years. Those who don't have protesters and marching bands. The new, very least among you now, apparently. And while I say that, I know it's not just me. It's not just white-skinned people. It's just, we don't have marching bands. We don't have multi-million-dollar settlements to be had. We don't have drug companies which can be sued for multi-millions of dollars. We don't have a Ben Crump, because Ben Crump is not interested in doing a case that doesn't have a multi-million-dollar settlement opportunity. Why don't we educate the American people about how Ben Crump has nothing to do with criminal justice? Why don't we educate the public about due process? Why don't we educate the public about how it is that the prosecutors actually don't at all have the best interest, the interest at all necessarily of the victim in mind, because their task is not that. It's on behalf of the state. They are charged, and their victory, their conviction, as in my case, has nothing to do with, quote, justice. Two counts aggravated assault, 13-1204. Aggravated assault resulting in serious bodily injury. There's no eyeball there, okay? That's dangerous, right? Yeah. First offense, you don't have to prove intent because it's reckless. Reckless is all that is required for this. Each count had a minimum of 5 years, presumptive 7.5, maximum 15. How is it that the victim is still suffering every day? It's worse than ever. He spent a mere 5 months. He has yet to pay 1 penny. There's a lot of evidence. There's answers. And perhaps this would be a good time, now that we're very clear on the other's point of view, perhaps now we can finally have, quote, the people's attorney perhaps now we can look at the role the prosecutors play. No justice, no peace. It's a good slogan. But unfortunately, it's also been a very triggering, terrifying reminder, the reality that the victims live every day. We don't really didn't need to hear the slogan. The other thing, George Floyd tested positive for COVID. What the general public knows now is what those of us have known for a very long time. That would be a reason why he would have been it would have made sense to have him in a prone position. When a cough could kill. Also, George Floyd had methamphetamine fentanyl. He was not sober. He was not the innocent. Methamphetamine. That's how this happened. Tempers flare. Bottles get flown, and this is what happens. It's not something you know anything about. The general public has no business making comments and judgments about these cases. They are way out of their league. Perhaps we can investigate. Perhaps we can consider all that the general public knows, that those of us that were on the front line, we've known for a long time. Not for sure, but that would be a reason. Due process. Inform the public about Crump, Ben Crump. As I'm watching these Capitol riot trials, I keep thinking about Ben Crump. Wasn't he the one that was in the crowds telling them what counts, demanding which manslaughter it should be, which criminal statute violation, which number? Those people have no idea what the numbers are. And not only that, what a bad, misleading example that sets for the general public. They don't ask the victims. The victims aren't even involved. There's no Ben Crump by the victim's side when it's not a multi-million-dollar settlement. In fact, there's no one by the victim's side. Why don't we do a little research on some reality, like real reality, not reality TV, point, counterpoint. Because now that it has blown into a historical vantage point, perhaps now, before it's inscribed into the history books, we can set the record straight, because we are on our way to writing a history that is only going to need to be revised in the very same way, where there was a whole lot that was misunderstood, and it is not going down. It is not going down accurately at this point. So before we start the presses, before the history gets any further Why don't we do an investigation? Why don't we set the record straight so that we're not having the tail wagging the dog? Set the record straight.